Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to the Rebel, Reject, Create podcast. And today, my guest is Hanne Kristiansen, who is a people-obsessed corporate innovator. Welcome to the show, Hanne.
Thank you so much, David. I love being here.
Cool. I like that introduction, the corporate innovator, because people might be thinking, well, what is someone like you, corporate innovator, doing on a show called Rebel, Reject, Create? Where do you see the link?
Well, I come from a long history of innovation on the corporate inside. I've been working in food and drink in London, in New York, and also latterly in Dublin, where I sat as head of innovation for Kellogg across Europe. So I'm a corporate innovator because I'm trying to innovate from within. I have been doing that throughout my whole career. And then, you know, lots of hurdles to jump and frustrations to have. But I'm also really fascinated by what stands in our way and what happens when we break down that mold. What happens when we rebel? What happens when we reject in
Hmm.
order to create?
Right. My mantra. So how do you see the rebel and the reject part? I think the create we'll get into in a moment, but how do you see that first bit?
Well, I think if you sort of rebel, then when you are working in big organizations, then they would run away screaming, really, unless they're working from a burning platform and on a need to pivot, then obviously there is a need to rebel. But otherwise, shaking the tree is something that, feels scary and not something that you necessarily celebrate or certainly wouldn't promote.
Mm.
Um, so it's really a matter of stroking the dog with the hairs. So I would basically talk about rebelling in terms of reframing.
Right.
So it's a much more palatable way of rebelling,
Hmm.
but still sort of a way to rebel, but in a stealth way. So if
Right.
you start reframing things and seeing it from a different perspective, then that
Right.
suddenly can make things happen, I think, in the corporate world.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I agree. I mean, I think I speak about the rebel part as being rebelling against external factors, which essentially is reframing your own perspective. Actually, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
Might have to
yeah.
rewrite my manifesto.
Yeah. But
Now,
it's also about rebelling from internal factors because quite
right.
often it's actually the internal factors that hold us back more
Mm.
than the external factors. The external factors can often be fuel for the fire,
Hmm.
but the internal factors is then is the oxygen that makes the fire go out even before the fire has started.
Right. Well, I want to dive into that because I think a lot of people don't recognize themselves as being creative because they don't fit the stereotype.
Yeah.
You've spent the last large chunk of your history developing a system for helping people understand their creativity better, called
Yeah.
the Creative ID. Um,
Correct.
how does that work? And I mean, how does that help people?
Well, I think really it starts by rebelling, by reframing, to be honest,
Good.
because the key question we ask is, how are you creative?
Hmm.
Um, because really, in our upbringing and in the way that we think about the world, the question we typically ask ourselves and each other is, how creative are you?
Right.
Right? We sort of feel that, oh, to be creative and to think innovatively, we have to be incredibly creative with a capital C.
Yeah.
But that's because we brought up with this binary question or the ranking question of who is more or less creative. It's only the creative types that really have permission to be creative. But if you sit on the corporate inside, you don't necessarily feel very creative. You might feel professional, but you don't feel very creative. So when we're presented with the question, how creative are you? We tend to shy away from it, or certainly it tends to ignite our limiting beliefs. Whereas if you reframe or rebel against that sort of typical way of thinking by reframing it into how are you creative rather than how creative are you, then you can already hear that that question starts opening up a different conversation. You
Right.
start becoming curious and saying, yeah, how am I creative? And you start reflecting on the fact that I can be creative in different ways,
Yeah.
rather than ranking yourself maybe against people who are creative geniuses, which, feels reachable.
Yeah. Okay. So, wow, yeah, I like that because I think immediately I kind of go, oh yeah, well, how am I creative? I'm creative with words, with writing, with what have
Mm.
you, and
Yeah,
I'm totally comfortable in that.
yeah,
And I've heard other people respond when I've asked them, but you really are creative. You might be an accountant, but look at how you solve all these problems for tax returns. And they go, oh,
yeah, yeah.
well, yeah, I guess I am creative in that.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's really, really important. And this is also where then the reject comes in, I think, in the way that I see reject is actually around redefining. So
Yeah,
first of all, we reframe it from how creative are you to how are you creative? But
yeah,
then we also reject the stereotypical definition of creativity, which doesn't tend to belong to the corporate world. It tends to
yeah,
belong to the world of arts or, the artistic skills or, the creative industries. But actually, creativity shows up in so many different ways. And that's why we need to redefine it and roll it out so that it becomes not just about the artistic skills, the ability to draw, the ability to write prose or beautiful poems or whatever it might be, but also the ability to connect the dots, the ability to understand the context, to imagine the implications of the choices you make, bringing people together
mm,
to reach an outcome. So it's not just about the artistic skills, it's also about human skills.
brilliant. So I'm assuming this segues quite neatly into creative ID and the different creative types in that system.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. That would be nice. I might be able to show you because we've done research into this. Of course, you know this, but the listeners might not. So we've done research together with University of Sheffield since 2008 into exactly this question: how are you creative? So we are not interested in the extent to which people are creative at all, but we are really curious about the different styles of creativity that sits in the world of work.
Mm,
So a typical work day, a typical work week, we're talking here on a Monday. I don't know when this is coming out, but a typical work day and a typical work week, what styles of creativity show up and what is our affinity with that as human beings?
right.
And in that, we also start broadening it out so it becomes much more accessible. And ultimately, we talk about creative intelligence, right?
Ah,
So when you talk about creative intelligence, you also start redefining what you hear and move also further away from the artistic world because creative intelligence applies equally to an accountant as it does to a copywriter, right?
yeah,
It shows up in
absolutely.
different ways. So
Yep.
shall I show you these?
Yes, go on.
All right. So basically, through the research we've done, we've identified 5 creative styles. And one of the things that's really important is that none of these are better or worse than others. Uh, they're all equal, but they're all different. So they contribute to the creation journey, whatever that journey might be, in different ways. So of course we have stimulating. So stimulating is like the rebel.
Mhm.
It's the divergent, disruptive, very prolific popcorn brain that spurs out lots of ideas. It's all about quantity rather than quality. They can go and have ideas based on absolutely nothing, and they love coloring outside the lines. So,
Yeah,
of course, in our research, that style of creativity absolutely exists. So that's the first one. But there is also spotting. So where stimulating is about going from nothing, spotting is about connecting the dots, starting with something. And that something can be conversations like this one. It can be reading research decks or, go traveling or, whatever dots you might have, you
yeah,
then connect them into surprising solutions.
nice.
Um, but it's also very intuitive, it's very abstract. So it can also be about finding patterns between things. So if I look into the sky, I might see stars, but people with a preference for spotting, they see constellations. And
Right.
constellations are the beginning of meaning. They're not necessarily meaning in themselves, but they're the beginning of meaning that you can then build from,
Mhm, mhm.
right? So that's the
Yep.
second one. The third one is sculpting. So if in spotting we have the abstract, then sculpting is about making it concrete, taking the beginning of meaning, fully forming it, and that can be in lots of different ways, through storytelling, through prototyping, whatever it might be, but making things fully formed so they can happen.
Right.
And in doing so, we also need to problem solve because we are suddenly coming across hurdles we couldn't foresee at the abstract level, and we need to jump those and overcome them, right?
Right.
So one of the things that's really important as well in the corporate world is when you make things concrete, other people can see what you see, and that's when you start aligning people behind ideas so they can actually happen.
Right.
Because otherwise you're just staying in the imagination, you're staying in the abstract, right? So
Yes.
these are the first three styles. We call those generative styles because they generate output in one way or another. But we also in business have two other very important styles, and it's the enabling styles. They create the environment, the frame within this journey where it can actually happen. So the first enabling styles is what we call selecting. It's about understanding the context and putting that context together so you can create a direction. Sometimes that's in the form of a strategy, but it doesn't always have to be.
Right.
And then when you move things forward, you have to make choices, and you make choices based on the fully formed ideas rather than an abstract thought. Because when you make a choice, you need to imagine the implications.
Yeah.
Because the choices are based on the implications rather than choices themselves. Because
Okay.
ultimately, it's the implication where that choice will take you that's more important than the choice.
Right.
Yeah, does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yes.
So that's selecting. And then we have supporting. So if selecting is about the end destination, supporting is about the journey. It's about bringing out the human aspect, understanding that if we want to create and let that creation lead to something new and different, whether that's innovation or transformation or any type of growth, then a smart way to do that is to get diverse minds around the table. So I often talk about great minds don't think alike.
Yeah.
And it's really around taking that diversity of thought, and comes into cognitive diversity, that diversity of thought, taking that and leading that to a constructive outcome.
Right.
And there you need to have a lot of empathy to put yourself into other people's shoes and really understanding where they're coming from and how can you leverage their magic
Yeah.
to the greater good of the team and the task they're working on.
All
So
right.
these are the 5 styles.
Cool. I
Do
like
you
it.
see yourself in any of those, David, yet?
Well, I'm definitely the popcorn brain to a certain extent,
Yeah.
but I'm also very concrete, action oriented. I'm not
Yeah.
content to just sit and have ideas. I want to get going on something pretty soon. So I would
Yeah.
also therefore be oh, I've forgotten them already.
Yeah, the sculptor, the
The sculptor.
sculpting.
There we
Yeah,
go.
step into the shoes of sculpting. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
you've clearly, I mean, since 2008,
Yeah.
like exerted a huge amount of time and effort and thought onto this.
Mhm.
Why? Why do you think creativity is so important that we need to understand it in a new way?
This is basically because of my own frustration throughout my corporate career, to be honest. I worked in innovation all my life, and I could just see how we wasted so much time and talent by not fully understanding the human fuel that powers innovation, that powers transformation, and powers the growth that businesses always seek.
Yeah.
Because creativity is misunderstood. And I could feel it on my own body and in my own mind, but it was very difficult to express. So when I left the corporate world in 2007, I'm like, you know what? I need to start spending my time, or I want to spend my time on something that has felt really meaningful, but also unfinished, like this spotter stage of having a hunch. And I needed to pull that through into sculpting and actually make it happen and really understanding and deeply. And I was really fortunate to find Professor Kamal Birdie at the University of Sheffield, who is a organizational psychologist. And we have a shared passion for creativity and innovation in the business world. So I come at it from a sort of an innovation angle, and he comes at it from a science angle. And we said, like, let's understand what is going on here and start actually identifying it. And
Right.
what's important here is we're not trying to put a label on people. So it's not about you are this.
Hmm.
Of course, we think often when we talk about psychometric tools like this one, because that's essentially what it is, what we created, we often think about personality because a lot of
Yes.
other psychometric tools is about personality. Or if it's not about personality, we think about capability.
Right.
But again, this is where we sort of rebel and reject again. David, you'd like this because we actually talk about preferences.
Yes.
And we believe that preferences are much more powerful than personality or capability, because preference is what you naturally lean into, what gives you energy, what motivates you.
Right.
It's not about who you are, but it's what you prefer, what you enjoy, what gives you energy. And in our world today, where we're at the risk of burnout every single day of the week, right? It's
Yeah.
really smart to be creatively intelligent and know what gives me energy, what do I prefer, what motivates me,
Yeah.
because then you can actually achieve more faster and you could do it better as well.
Just want to pick up on something you just said there. We need to be more creatively intelligent. Do you think it's possible to be intelligent without being creative?
I think so. I think so. You certainly can. I think there's different types of intelligences, so to speak.
Right.
But I think there are, you know, I think you can, but it might lie in a small way, because I always say you need to be creatively intelligent for everything that's not copy and paste, right? So a lot of tasks in our world today, we really have to engage our brain,
Yeah.
right? But creative intelligence is not the same as being intelligent,
No.
right? So it's a different type of intelligence. So it's not an IQ type of thing,
Yeah.
because again, the IQ is about measuring your extent to which to which you are intelligent.
Right.
And here is much more about the deeper understanding of how I think, what are my preferences.
Yeah.
So it's not about ranking anybody and saying more or less.
Mm.
It's really about saying, these are my preferences. This is giving you intelligence about your own self and how you think and what you naturally lean into,
Yeah.
rather than how good you are or who you are.
Right.
Yeah.
So in a world where so many things are becoming essentially outsourced and automated, via AI or whatever automated process, do you feel like creativity is becoming more or less important?
Well, I think it's a different style of creativity that might come into play more or less.
Hmm.
And this is again where being creatively intelligent is vital, because then we can be more choiceful in how we engage into tasks. So people like to say, oh, AI, oh, it's good or bad. And again, it's this binary way of thinking, which I really reject. I really reject it on everything, to be honest. It's like it makes us more simplistic, and I think we need to be more sophisticated in our VUCA world, right? We need to em embody a more sophisticated way of being in the world. That's not to say that we should make it complex. This system that I have created with the university is actually very intuitive. It's not complex. It's very straightforward, but it's very sophisticated.
Right.
Right. And I think the way that we think about the world of AI is good or bad, we don't know, because it also evolves all the time. But I
Mm.
think what's interesting is, how can these five creative styles help you thrive in a world, in an age of AI,
Right.
right? So for example, if we take stimulating, I can imagine that if your preference is stimulating, what's going on right now with technology and AI, it's like you're just in your playground, you're loving it. You have new toys every day.
Yep.
And every day that new toy can do some things that it couldn't do yesterday. So you're just like pressing all the buttons and seeing what happens, right? So you're completely in your element if you have a preference for stimulating. If you have a preference for selecting, then, or if that's one of your preferences, then you will need to start thinking, okay, maybe we need to put some parameters around this and make
Yeah.
some tough choices of where we employ it and how we do it. But we can only do that once we might have done some cases that
Yeah.
has some evidence, right? So this is where you put sort of the strategic framing around it. Whereas maybe if your preference is sculpting, you might go in the world of AI and start creating here's how you get the most out of it. Here's how to write a good prompt,
Yeah.
where you go in and you start actually using it as a tool in the engine room,
Yeah.
right? So these five styles, each of them you can already see approach this idea of AI from different perspectives and
Yeah.
add value to it in different
Yeah.
ways.
Wow. So it's like different lenses that you can put on. And I'm
Absolutely.
assuming from what you said about preferences, it's also got nothing to do with my capability. So even
Yeah.
if my preference is for sculpting
Yeah.
or stimulating, that doesn't
Yeah.
mean to say I cannot do the others.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where
Right.
we talk about shoes. Imagine that you have 5 pairs of shoes in your closet,
Yeah.
right? So you have your running shoes, you have your, you have your sandals, you have your slippers for at home, you have your Wellington boots for a rainy
Yeah.
weekend, and then you have your formal shoes maybe with or without a heel. So we all have access to all 5, but we also have our favorite. So we have
Yeah.
our preferences, but also these shoes are appropriate for different occasions. So
Yeah.
all of them are equal, but some of them are more fit for certain purposes than others. And this is again why we talk about creative intelligence. When you understand your preferences, you can start being more intelligent about the task you're doing and the styles that you might need for that task, but
Right.
also who do you collaborate with? Because if
Yes.
I have to do a task that's not my preference, then I can still do it, but it's going to take a lot of energy. So maybe it's better for me to buddy up with somebody who has that as a preference,
Right.
or even delegate the task to them
Brilliant.
because they love it, right?
Right. And
So
that just
yeah,
makes such a huge difference to the outcome, doesn't it?
yes, it does. It does. But yes, it doesn't mean that just because you have a preference, it means that you're good at it.
No.
Um, but of course, there is a correlation as well. So the more you do something, the better you become. But we are very focused on this is about preferences, not personality or capability.
Right.
But of course, it's interlinked, right? But
Yeah.
we need to just have a really clear incision point that preferences in the world today, where we feel so overwhelmed, it's actually key to understand that because that's what gives you energy, what motivates you.
Good. Hannah, thank you so much. If there was one thing that you would want to change about the way people see creativity right now, what would it be?
Well, everyone is creative, but just in different ways.
Right.
And that might sound like, just a fancy phrase, but we know that as a fact. We have evidence and data from all around the world. So we
Right.
know that this is true. So once you give that into people, yeah, you are creative. You just need to find out how you are creative.
Brilliant. Hannah, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
You are so welcome. It's
Thank you.
great to be here.
And for everybody listening, if you want to know more about Hannah and her work as a corporate innovator, and as well, of course, the creative ID system, all of her links are in the show notes below. So go and check out her site and see what she's got to offer. And maybe you should sign yourself up to find out what your creative ID is. And in the meantime, remember, stay creative and, because Hannah agrees now, rebel and reject so you can create.